You know, it's the end of the season, and it's a loss to Pittsburgh, and usually after losses to Pittsburgh, changes come in. Now, what will those changes be? That's what we're left to speculate on, but I am sure that changes will be made. Will they be on the offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball, or to the whole staff in general? It might even be the whole regime. I don't think anything is off the table, but I don't think everything is on the table. And what I mean by that is I think Kevin could be gone. Kevin could be very safe. I think we don't really know at this point. Maybe by the time you watch this video, you have a better idea. But as of right now, late Sunday night, I have no clue. I feel like Kevin's safe because usually when they fire the coach, it comes out pretty quick. Not officially, but the rumor's out. And the rumor's usually out before the game. Then, it's for he's coaching for his job, right? It's happened in the Haslam era before. That report has not come out. I don't think this to be one of those situations where they're planning on moving on from Kevin Stefanski. That does not mean that they won't, right? Because maybe they're going to have a meeting tomorrow or after the game about what they want to see happen and what they expect the changes to be to the coaching staff for Kevin to be in this offseason. And if Kevin doesn't agree to those changes, he probably won't be back. But I don't think the plan A here is to get rid of Kevin Stefanski. I think the plan A is to build around and to switch out some pieces around Kevin Stefanski. This is looking more like a renovation than a rebuild, right? It seems like they want to keep the current structure of Dee Podesta, Andrew Berry, and Kevin Stefanski, which, albeit the results aren't great, the results are the best that this franchise has had since 1999, which means something, but also means that the bar has been low. And it seems like they want to keep that intact, and they want to build on top of that, which I can understand. On one perspective, you have people saying, hey, the results have been mediocre. The results have not been great the last 2 years. And we want this team to take that step from, look, for a while they were dumpster fire. They're no longer dumpster fire. They're just kind of mediocre. And you want to go from mediocre to good or great. You want to go to great, preferably, right? And I understand that. And then you have another side of this, which is saying, hey, we can't skip a bunch of steps and expect to get to where everybody else got. Cincinnati had to go through some years of bad and mediocre to get to where they're at. And part of that was sticking with some guys through some bad and mediocre seasons. Pittsburgh, people forget before they got Ben, they were a pretty mediocre football team. For a big chunk in that period, right? Where they were they got to the AFC Championship, I think, one time, but they were never really a serious threat. They were just kind of around. Like a 500 team kind of around. And then they got Ben and Mike Tomlin, things changed. Well, they got Ben at the end of Cowher, and then Tomlin came along and things changed for them. In Baltimore had some mediocre times, man, for real. Right before Lamar got there, those last few years of Joe Flacco were absolute mediocrity, but they kept John Harbaugh, and they kept that. You look at this division, and everybody says, we want to be one of the other teams in the division. You look at the division, everybody else is not firing their coach. Even a guy like Zach Taylor, who, after 2 years in Cincinnati, you absolutely had a case to fire him. A lot of people in Cincinnati absolutely wanted Zach Taylor fired, and they never did it. Ended up going to the Super Bowl next year. They look like a very, very serious contender this year. It could have ended up being the right move. It could end up being the wrong move, but they're where we want to be. And partly because they stuck with their coach. Every other team in this division does not fire their coach immediately after a couple of bad years. Now, Pittsburgh's a little different because their bad years are not disasters. But look at Baltimore. Baltimore's had some bad years. You know, Baltimore's been under 500. John Harbaugh's been there. You know what I mean? Zach Taylor started off bad. I mean, Marvin Lewis was under 500 a ton. So that's the question. That's the question. Is Kevin Stefanski such a bad head coach in your opinion? Or the type of head coach that you cannot be more than mediocre with? I tend to think not. I think he's a coach that you can have a winning program with. I see no reason why not. You know, everything that you complain about Stefanski doesn't do well, you can find 10 other coaches that have had success in the NFL that do the same things wrong. I don't think he has that many unique problems. That's where I am with it. Yes, you don't want to just keep anybody. We're not talking about just keeping anybody. We're not talking about keeping Freddie Kitchens. We're talking about a guy who was coach of the year 2 years ago and saying, hey, if we're going to choose to be, if we're going to aim to be a stability-based university organization, if we want stability to be something that we covet, like every other organization in this division that we want to be like, because let's face it, we're the only one that hasn't won the division yet. Well, then we got to make decisions like they would. If that's the goal, you have to make decisions like they would. And as much as we love to give credit to Pittsburgh's organization, give credit to Ravens, and most recently give credit to the Bengals, none of those organizations would fire Kevin Stefanski after this year. It wouldn't really even be a question. If this were Pittsburgh, Kevin's coming back. What are you talking about, Kevin's fired? Kevin's coming back. If this were Baltimore, Kevin's coming back. What are you talking about, Kevin getting fired? Kevin's coming back. If this were Cincinnati, you know they ain't about to fire Kevin. And for Cincinnati, it's because they're cheap, but like, still the result is the result. So we have to ask ourselves that question. I know a lot of people are mad, angry, frustrated right now, and they want the coach fired because something has to be done. But again, I ask the question, if the goal is to be like Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Cincinnati, why would we make a decision those franchises would never make? Because the only franchise in this division that would fire Kevin Stefanski after 4 years, is the Cleveland Browns. In this division, we're the only ones that would do that, historically. And we're the only ones that haven't won the division. At some point, we have to look at the pattern of behavior we have had and realize it's us. And if you cannot, I can't make the argument that I think Pittsburgh would fire him. I can't make the argument that I think Baltimore would fire him. I can't make the argument that Cincinnati would fire him. We're the only team I can make the argument for firing him in this division that would do it. That other teams look at and go, yeah, they would do that. And you might think he's Matt Nagy. You might think Kevin is not worth holding on to. And that's all valid, but that's not the question I'm asking you. Question I'm asking you is, if Kevin were to coach at any other team, in any other team in the AFC North, you think they're going to fire him after this year? I think not. They have a history of not doing it. You know, Pittsburgh's let coaches have under 500 seasons with them before and not fired them. Like Mike Tomlin just hasn't had one. But if he did, his job's not at risk. He can have 3 of them in a row. His job's not at risk. And you can say, hey, John Harbaugh's won a Super Bowl. That's true. Mike Tomlin's won a Super Bowl. That's true. Zach Taylor's been to a Super Bowl. That's true. But they've all had more rough years before they got to that point that they were able to get stuck through with. And that's all I'm saying. I don't know if Kevin Stefanski is one of the top 10 coaches in the NFL. But what I do know is that you don't need a top 10 coach to win the Super Bowl. What I do know is that you just kind of need stability and somebody who is at least competent in the role to have it. And I don't believe Kevin Stefanski to be incompetent. You might not like how he does his job. You might not like the plays that he calls, my bad. But he is not incompetent. His offense needs some fixing. It definitely needs some adjustments. I think they're trying to do too much rhythm and timing stuff. Well, not rhythm and timing stuff, but I think they're trying to do too much stuff that they did for lesser quarterbacks with a better quarterback, and that's kind of bringing everybody down. I think there's definitely some changes that need to be made. I'm not saying run it back with the same staff on both sides of the ball. I think Alex Van Pelt probably should be moved on from or allowed to pursue other opportunities. I think you need a new voice in there. You know, Kevin should be the one finding that voice, because ultimately, if you have a head coach that you're undermining by hiring his assistants, then you might as well just fire him. And that is also another point I want to get across. Why I don't think Kevin Stefanski should be fired, and why I think it would be a mistake, because if the goal is to be like the other organizations, you have to start making decisions like them. And that's not a decision they would make. But also, let's be real with it. If there's no in between you can choose here. There's not enough time. If the ideal behind Kevin Stefanski is, hey, we're going to keep him and see how the first half of the next season goes, you might as well fire him. If you have any thought in your mind that you're going to fire Kevin Stefanski halfway through next year, you should just do it now. You're wasting time at that point. Don't wait and see. If you don't trust him to get through the whole next season, you don't need to keep him. That's a decision they need to make internally. I'm not in that building. I don't know what goes on. But if they feel like they need to see something and they're going to evaluate whether he should be on the team or not in the middle of the year, and that firing him in the middle of the season next year is on the table, you might as well just get rid of him now. Either you commit to him or you don't. But no more half measures. Because if you want to know what set this franchise back more than anything, it's not the LOL bad draft picks. Those are kind of a symptom of it. It's not the LOL bad free agencies signings. That's kind of a symptom of it. But the root of the problem with this franchise for the last 20 years has been that they have always been addicted to half measures. Oh, we kind of want to stink, but we kind of want to be good. So instead of just going all out on stinking, and this was before Sachi Brown, what the team would do would be they would build a pretty mediocre team, not spend a ton of money, but then say, hey, we don't want to be that bad, and then pay a bunch of money for like a Willie McGinnis or Kiko, or not Kiko Alonso, the big dude. He called himself a giraffe, you know what I mean? But he was here with the team. Like, we would do stuff like that, and that would lead to 6-10. And 6-10 was the reason why we were never able to get Andrew Luck, why we were never able to get Cam Newton, any of those top quarterback prospects, and why we kept having to do the half measure and take Brandon Weeden and Johnny Manziel and Deshaun Kaiser. The half measures are what set this team back. When this team finally committed to stinking, we finally got some good players. Okay, we got some of the better quarterback play we've had since 99, even though it didn't work out, but still better quarterback play than what we had because we went all in on stinking. We got Myles Garrett. We got Denzel Ward. We went all in, Nick Chubb, because we went all in on stinking. We finally stopped making half-measure decisions. And then that led to the best season since they've came back in 1999. The half measures have to stop. So either you're okay with Kevin, you want to roll with Kevin, you can give Kevin next year, and you stick with it. But none of this half measure stuff. None of this, okay, Kevin, you can stay, but I'm going to hire your assistants. Because you're just undermining him at that point. And when you're at the point of undermining him, it's going to end up like Hugh Jackson did, where he just was fired by the middle of the season. You can't make the decision to keep somebody but undermine them. That's a half measure. That's going to be a disaster. We're going to waste a very important year. I don't want that. While I don't want him fired, if you just fire him now, I'm not going to be upset. But if you fire him in the middle of next year and you do a bunch of weird shit around that, like try to force hire his assistants and make it an unmalleable workplace, like that's what's going to drive me nuts. If those kind of decisions, the half measures, have been what set this franchise back for the last 20-something years. You can point to bad draft choices. You can point to bad free agency decisions. All of those things point directly back to a half measure that was made at some point. A decision that was made somewhere at some point that, hey, we don't want to be 2-14. We want to be 6-10. And that's led to us being just bad for 20 years. You can't win football games. You can't be a good organization if you're scared to make a full decision. So that's all I want. I've said my piece. I've laid it out on why I think Kevin should stay and why I think there should be changes made and how I think those changes should probably be made. But if you don't trust Kevin like that to make those changes, I understand. You just got to get rid of him now then. None of this, okay, Kevin, we're going to keep you, but we're going to hire your replacement to be the offensive coordinator just in case we fire you in the middle of the year. That's the kind of bullshit that has ruined this franchise for years. That has made qualified candidates, when we had Kyle Shanahan in the building, run away and never look back. That's the kind of stuff. They can't do that. So either they say, hey, Kevin, you're going to have to change out your coordinators, make the best decision possible. We got to make the playoffs next year, though. Understand that. We got to make the playoffs next year. So make good decisions. But I trust you to do that. And then we'll see how 2023 goes and make our decisions after that. I'm fine with that. They got to make the playoffs next year or else everybody's gone, even Andrew Berry. But if the choice is we're going to do a bunch of this half-measure stuff, that's a disaster. If the choice is that we're just going to fire Kevin right now, okay, I don't like it, but I can respect it because it's not a half measure. No, it's not something Pittsburgh or Cincinnati would do, but also it's not the thing that we've been doing for the last 20 years, which is half measures. So I can respect it. I want this franchise to get out of this cycle. You want this franchise to get out of this cycle. Anybody watching this video in good faith wants this franchise to get out of this cycle. There are two ways you get out of it, and that's by not doing the same stuff that kept you in it. So either you fire Kevin or you trust him enough to run it back next year with the assistance that he wants, and you make him make some, and he has to understand that he has to make changes. If he wants to just come back and run it back with everybody, that's not going to work. But if he doesn't want to do that, you just got to move on. If he does understand that, makes the changes he needs to, and you trust him to do that, that could work. If you want to just get rid of him and hire somebody else, that could work. But what's not going to work is a half measure. You can't kind of want to fire him. You either want to fire him or you don't. And that's my one thing that I hope. We could talk about the game. Deshaun Watson didn't play well. There's really no excuse. I think this is his worst game since coming back. Maybe the Houston game was worse, but like at least he had the excuse of being rusty. This was just a flat bad game from him. No, I'm not concerned long term for it, but it was a bad game. Like we ain't got to hide it. We ain't got to act like it wasn't. It was a flat bad game. Not really an excuse for it. But how he played in this game isn't that important because the larger body of work is what we're going off of. But how this coaching decision is handled is what's important about this game. The result didn't matter for the Browns. They were going to be out the playoffs no matter what. They don't have a first-round pick. This doesn't affect anything for them. But what does matter is how they handle this offseason. This is the most important offseason in their franchise because they put a lot into this offseason. 3 first-round picks, $230 million in at quarterback. How are you going to handle it? Because if we handle this offseason the same way we handled the 0-16 offseason, where we were doing a bunch of half measures everywhere and everybody got fired and it was a disaster, then we're just going to be a clown show again. But if we handle this, if we make a strong decision in either direction, we have a chance. We have a chance. But that's what needs to happen. No half measures. Make a choice one way or the other. I'm not going to debate it with you. I've made my points clear. I know what I want. If you don't agree with me, cool. I'm not really interested in arguing about this. What I want to see from this organization is a clear decision. A clear decision. No half measures. That's it.